What if I told you there was a job in ancient Rome so sacred, so revered, that it elevated women to a status above all others? A position of immense power, wealth, and influence, held by only 6 individuals at a time. But this privilege came at a terrifying price. A single mistake, a moment of human weakness, and the punishment was to be buried alive. This is the story of Rome's most forbidden profession, the life of a Vestal Virgin. In the heart of the Roman Forum, the bustling center of the most powerful empire the world had ever known, stood a sacred hearth. Within it burned a perpetual flame, a fire believed to be the very soul of Rome. If it ever went out, the city and its empire would fall. The guardians of this eternal fire were the Vestals, a college of priestesses chosen before the age of 10 to serve the goddess Vesta for 30 years. Their selection was a solemn affair. From a pool of patrician families, young girls were handpicked for their perfection free of any physical or mental blemish. One day they were children, playing in the courtyards of their family villas. The next, they were taken from their parents, their hair was cut, and they were sworn into a life of absolute devotion. Their first 10 years were spent as novices, learning the intricate rituals, the sacred texts, and the immense responsibility they now carried. They were not just priestesses. They were living symbols of Rome's purity and continuity. In exchange for their service, the Vestals were granted privileges unimaginable for other Roman women. They were exempt from the authority of their fathers and, later, any husband. They could own property, write their own wills, and testify in court. When they traveled through the city in their covered litters, even the highest magistrates had to make way. Their presence could pardon a condemned criminal on the way to execution. They were untouchable, their lives sacrosanct. They commanded vast wealth and resided in the magnificent house of the Vestals, a luxurious palace filled with courtyards, pools, and finely decorated rooms, a stark contrast to the modest lives of most Roman citizens. They were, in essence, the spiritual mothers of the Republic, and later, the Empire. Their every action was scrutinized, their purity a reflection of the state's own health. The next 10 years of their service were spent as active priestesses, performing the sacred rites that ensured Rome's divine favor. Their most crucial duty was maintaining the eternal flame. Day and night, they tended the fire, ensuring it never wavered. They performed complex purification rituals, prepared the sacred salt meal known as *molla salsa* for state sacrifices, and guarded secret objects kept within the temple, items so holy that only they were permitted to see them. Their lives were a constant cycle of ritual and responsibility. They were the keepers of Rome's spiritual heartbeat, and the pressure was immense. The fate of millions rested on their shoulders. But this power, this reverence, was balanced on a knife's edge. It was all contingent on one single, unwavering rule. They had to maintain their vow of chastity for the entire 30 years of their service. This vow, their virginity, was intrinsically linked to the health and safety of Rome itself. If a Vestal were to break this sacred oath, it was considered a profound act of treason, a pollution that threatened to bring down the wrath of the gods upon the city. The Romans called this crime *incestum*, and the punishment for *incestum* was one of the most horrifying sentences in the Roman world. Because their bodies were sacred, it was forbidden to spill their blood. So, the Romans devised a crueler fate. The guilty Vestal would be stripped of her priestly robes and paraded through the silent, mourning city in a closed litter, as if it were a funeral procession. She was then taken to a place called the Campus Celeratus, the evil field. There, an underground chamber had been prepared, containing a small bed, a lamp, and a meager portion of bread, water, milk, and oil. The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, would utter a final prayer, and the Vestal would descend a ladder into her tomb. The entrance was then sealed, and she was left to die in the darkness, buried alive beneath the earth. Her alleged lover would suffer a different, but equally brutal, fate, flogged to death in a public square. These instances, though rare, sent shockwaves through Roman society. The historian Livy tells us of several such cases. In 483 BC, a Vestal named Appia was found guilty and entombed. In 216 BC, during the darkest days of the war against Hannibal, 2 Vestals, Opimia and Floronia, were convicted of incestum. One took her own life to escape the public horror. The other suffered the full, terrible ritual of live burial. These events were seen as catastrophic omens, signs that the gods had abandoned Rome. To appease them, the state would perform elaborate purification ceremonies, including, on some terrifying occasions, the ritual of live human sacrifice, burying foreign couples in the cattle market to expunge the spiritual stain. The message was clear. The purity of a single Vestal was directly tied to the survival of the Roman people. But what happened after the 30 years were up? If a Vestal successfully completed her service, maintaining the flame and her vow, she was given a generous pension and finally freed. At around the age of 40, she could return to private life and, for the first time, was allowed to marry. Some did, often to high-ranking Roman nobles. Marrying a former Vestal was seen as a great honor and a source of immense prestige. Imagine, after a lifetime of discipline and public reverence, being able to experience the world you had only ever observed. However, many chose not to marry. After 3 decades of independence, wealth, and unparalleled status, the prospect of submitting to the authority of a husband, as was standard for Roman wives, may have seemed unappealing. These former priestesses often remained influential figures in Roman society, serving as respected advisors and matriarchs within their powerful families. They had served their city, guarded its soul, and survived its most demanding trial. They had walked a path of extraordinary privilege and terrifying peril, and emerged as legends in their own time. The Vestal Virgins represent a profound paradox at the heart of ancient Rome. They were women who, through the complete denial of a conventional life, achieved a level of freedom and power that was utterly unique. They were revered as saints, but could be condemned as traitors. Their story isn't just about a strange and forbidden job. It's a story about power, piety, and the precarious nature of both. It reminds us that in the ancient world, the fate of an entire empire could be seen to rest on the shoulders of 6 women, tending a single, sacred flame in the heart of Rome. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, consider subscribing for more journeys into the forgotten corners of history.